Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Oh my gosh, we are awake. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for welcoming us as, I think, the first conversation of the day, which is exciting. Try to start us off in a lively capacity.
Yes.
Just as a little bit of a level setting, Justin, you came up on the financial side in a BA from Duke. As we just heard, you were at eBay, Backcountry, and now POWDR. Tell us a little bit about, as you embarked on that journey, as you moved through it now in a leadership position, top leadership position, what was the thing that surprised you most that you didn't know? Steepest learning curve, if you will.
Great. I think, even before I was CEO, I had HR all the way up from CFO. And I will say working in Silicon Valley is very different than working in Utah. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out culturally. And I needed to adjust my management style quite a bit. And there's definitely, a wake there that was tough. But I think really the steepest learning curve is the fact that curve is ever evolving. And, there's no right way to do anything. And that menu of things that will work seems to change on a regular basis. And even when you feel like you're on to something, it doesn't necessarily work to develop everyone. And earlier in my career, especially coming up through finance, where people index kind of a certain way, you had a management style and you stuck to it. And now my management style is different depending on who I'm talking to and what I'm trying to do with them. And that has been probably the biggest curve just from an EQ standpoint of spending 20 years trying to be technically proficient to like working on a totally different skill set and trying to be there for people in the way they need you rather than trying to impart a technical skill.
I suspect you may speak just a little bit more about showing up as people need you to show up for them, but I'm curious to know if for this group there's any Utah-specific learnings or kind of tactical guidance that you would offer.
The learning that I had when I came here is in Silicon Valley, I think a lot of people were like perpetually chasing an exit, right? It's the software internet world. And then you come here and everyone's like, well, no, I want to have a well-balanced life, which is why I moved here from Silicon Valley. So it shouldn't have surprised me when I encountered what I was here to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I work at the Tribune. It's a nonprofit newsroom. Transparency is a big deal for us at the Tribune. But it is for you too, even as your privately held company. I'd love to get your take on why you feel it's so important to be transparent when you're communicating with your teams.
Yeah, there's a lot of dialogue around being authentic. And, at some point, if you're in business, any business long enough, you're going to have speed bumps. You're going to have issues that come up, and you've got to figure out the best way to get through that. And if that's the first time that you're talking to your team about, hey, we need to shore up our balance sheet, we need to have a strong P&L so we can get through this, that's going to be a tough recovery. And a lot of companies they get accused of not following their corporate values when they have to make tough decisions. They have to, not pursue a great opportunity, or if they cut back on expenses or even layoffs. And as leaders, I think there's a lot of pressure for people when they're developing their mission, vision, values, and talking about their culture to almost present it in this altruistic way and present it in a way that when you're hiring that, you have a way you want people to feel when you're done talking about your culture. Yeah. And very seldom does that involve capitalism or we got to have a strong balance sheet. At POWDR, we call it balancing the objective with the subjective. And it's part of our conversations on a regular basis. One of our core values is enduring, which means we need to be around to do these things for the long haul. And in order to do that, we have to have a strong balance sheet. We have to have a focus on margins, to an extent, and make sure that we're around.
Where does HR come into play with respect to engaging in this more transparent approach?
So I think it's really important that the HR team understands what we're doing and why, as along with all the rest of the teams, so that when they're onboarding people or when they're having those conversations, that they can support the same thing. Again, I don't believe it's authentic for a company to have their mission, vision, values that doesn't include satisfying shareholders, making money for your employees, making money for your communities, making money to reinvest back in places. And so the HR team is part of developing that authenticity around, hey, we're in this business because we love it, but we're also in this business to stay in this business. And I think just having that be a part of general conversation on a regular basis. So when something like COVID happens and you have to dial things back, or interest rates go up 3x in a year and a half and you have to dial things back, when you stand in front of the company and you say, hey, we've got to make some tough decisions, everyone was already anticipating that, and you're basically just confirming what they believed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So you've talked a little bit about enduring and that being a priority for POWDR. Can you share some thoughts around how that's different for a privately owned versus publicly traded company?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in both environments throughout my career, and it's a lot easier to connect with a small group of shareholders that doesn't change very often in terms of alignment on values. And I have a really great relationship with our shareholders. On a personal level, we're very aligned on our approach. And when you work in a public company, you'll have some consistent big groups, but they're big institutional investors. And value investing doesn't mean the same thing in that universe as it does on our end. And so as a senior leadership team, you're just hoping that shareholder base is bought in for the same reasons you did. But at the end of the day, they're monitoring their returns as fiduciaries for whatever fund they're representing.
I want to switch gears a little bit here. We talked about how historically in maybe the outdoor rec industry used to hire people who could display as much passion as possible for a powder day, right? And you've changed your approach to hiring. Can you share a little bit more about that evolution and what that looks like at POWDR?
Great. Yeah, we've had a lot of great team members over the time that I've been there. And when I first started, there was a very heavy index towards people who are really great mountain bikers or really great skiers or riders. And we were just not able to grab that next gear from a tech standpoint or from a financial close standpoint, or really just shoring up the infrastructure that's necessary for a company that's got 8,000 employees.
Yeah.
And so when I came in and I started interviewing people, we would sit down and we would connect over our love of the outdoors, why I moved to Utah, how much I love skiing and biking, and then I'll say, well, what's the most interesting thing that you've worked on? And if someone comes and says, I did this, it's a different answer. But if they come in and say, oh man, I was in ADP and I took 3,000 job codes down to 1,200 over a 3-year period, and their body language and their adjectives that they use sort of match the conversation we just had about skiing and riding, I think we're in the right spot. And that's a shift, but the outdoor industry is just like every other industry. We have complicated problems that we need to solve, and we have opportunities that we need to grab onto. And it takes that functional skill set to do it. And some days are going to be a grind. Not every day is a powder day or a bluebird groomer. And we need people who are just as passionate about solving those problems as they are about getting those sweet turns. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you. I'm wondering how you coach up your HR team to hire for the skills that you're looking for.
Yeah, so we have a terrific head of HR now, and he also runs all of our tech services. And so he came up through the technology side, and he's a really passionate org structure guy. And so that was the first thing, is making sure that we've got somebody who really cares about what we're doing. And then from there, it's just about having those conversations on a regular basis, circling back to the top, why are we in business? What are we doing? What are we looking for? What skill sets do we need? Great. And I think with that, if that's just part of our regular conversation, it's not an event when you're having a conversation about why we like a candidate or we don't. It's just everybody just knows, because it's what we talk about on a regular basis.
Great, thank you. I don't know that there are many companies with 8,000 employees in the room. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. Your workforce is unique in that some of it, at least, is temporary, maybe even a majority, I'm making an assumption there. And this is topical at a national level now. Interested in your thoughts around, reliance on seasonal workers and any vulnerabilities there with respect to immigration reform, and or maybe one more question. Are you doing anything that others may learn from in this space?
Yeah, I mean, our industry has a lot of challenges, climate and staffing. Given where we're at today, I think we'll talk about staffing, but it's been tough. The outdoor economy is about just over $1 trillion, rounding, and it's heavily dependent on that seasonal workforce, which is then heavily dependent on the H-2B and the J-1s. Yeah. It really is, and so when we're talking about immigration reform, I would love to see some immigration reform around stability in what that looks like. And if we could get something out of Congress that lifted the visa caps, and also the time, for those of you who have to deal with the H-2B and the J-1s, they make those announcements for hiring in January, and we're like well into the season. So lifting the caps and
what is the time period in which they're allowed to stay?
It depends. It's different between the J1 and the H-2Bs, but and I can't remember right off the top of my head. But if we could get some reform that comes out of Congress that lifts those caps and puts a little bit more flexibility on timing, that would be ideal. What we have done is we've hired somebody who has deep experience with working in DC with our government and has those relationships, and we've worked on developing those and getting in front of the Department of the Interior or whoever we need to get in front of to make that happen. Our local rep here, Blake Moore, has been great. I'm sure you know him. Has been great with helping us out with that. But that's what we've done. And I know, having come up through companies of all different sizes, I think that's government relations is something that they feel like, the trade association is going to manage that for us, or this is going to happen. And when we came through COVID, I realized that is in fact not the case. Like we need to take responsibility for ourselves on that front and make sure we have those relationships and that we're speaking to our representatives directly.
It's interesting, we're a news organization, but I would say we have learned that the hard way too with the state legislature and open records and how we communicate such that we advocate for ourselves. So I hit my mic, that's a no-no. And so just want to emphasize that as a potential best practice, right? Which is, what direct relationships can you establish if you are looking for any sort of change that would involve local, state, or national, right? Government.
Well, I think for HR team, Stacy did this for us, but the HR teams at other companies, if you don't have in-house, you can reach out to those reps. And we've discovered that especially every couple of years, they're really excited to come and do a lunch and learn at your office with all your employees. So, but I thought that was a great idea when we started doing it. And that's something that I think everybody can do. You don't have to have an in-house department for it. And the HR team can add a lot of value by initiating that and making it happen.
That's great. And you don't really need an agenda for that kind of a conversation either, do you?
Correct. No, the congressperson will bring it.
Yeah, that's great. Someone thought that was a joke. That's good. So how is recruiting going in Utah? What does it feel like for you all these days? And we talked about kind of that international workforce, but what about here, closer to home?
So especially coming out through COVID, this is a place where a lot of people want to live. And so when we talk about recruiting, we have different categories. We have our corporate offices here in Utah. We have Snowbird and Woodward Park City here in Utah, where we have a diverse staff from seasonals all the way up to the executive teams. When we post a position for our main office in Park City, we have hundreds of people applying from all over the country. And so that's great. And then we definitely try to index here, just because it's harder for people to move in and find a house and do all that. But hiring here in the state of Utah has been phenomenal.
That's great. Good. So you mentioned Woodward, you mentioned Snowbird, but you've got a new responsibility, maybe a new client is the best way to put it. I'd love to spend just a few minutes talking about that new client. So would you tell us where you've recently made inroads and what that book of business looks like?
Great. Yeah, so we took everything that we consider to be our core competencies in hospitality, around food and beverage, hotel management, retail, rentals, and we've looked at ways where we felt that the unique skills that we have in terms of, we work really hard to make sure that we call it, we're helping each place be the best version of itself. And we don't try to homogenize anything. And we felt that that skill set would apply really well to the national parks. And that is a tough business to break into, very high barriers to entry. But if you get in, it's very rewarding for the staff. It doesn't have the highest margins or the best revenue, but it has a lot of synergies with our existing business. So last year we took over Stovepipe Wells in Death Valley National Park, and then probably more closer to home to everybody here, on January 1st this year, we took over the lodge inside of Zion National Park. And that's been steep. The Park Service is an interesting, the previous tenant had it for 54 years, and they handed us the keys on New Year's Eve at 10 o'clock, and then we opened on all new systems, all new payroll. We offboarded and onboarded everybody by 7 a.m.
Wow. So you had a great New Year's.
Yes. The team really rallied around that, and they love it. It's like we have this task force that just drops in and they get it done. And the wait staff didn't know what time they were supposed to be there for breakfast because they wouldn't let us post it in the break room the day before. Wow. And so members of my executive team here were out waiting tables on January 1st, and everybody has a great time high-fiving, and it brought a great energy.
So why did you do it if the margins are low and if it's difficult to work with the National Park System?
I wouldn't say it's difficult to work with them. It's just different than the Forest Service. But the thing, obviously, the margins are low, but there's lots of low margin businesses that are really phenomenal, and the demand in the National Park System is high. So it's almost certain. Like on the ski side, we're very weather dependent. The parks, not nearly as much. So just from a sheer business standpoint, it's a great business from that standpoint. The other piece specifically for us is, we've got those 8,000 employees, and about 2,000 of them are full-time year-round, and the rest are looking for other jobs in the off-season. Yeah. And we have some pretty good retention rates. People want to come go, but what we're seeing over time is more people are expecting this, gap year job, as people like to call it, but they want it for longer. And it's very difficult to have to go apply for a new job and sequence the timing. But the busy season at Zion National Park is exactly the opposite of Copper and Snowbird. And so we really like this idea of being able to create several hundred more full-time year-round benefited positions that keeps people in our family for a longer period of time. And so there's tremendous employee synergy in having these off-season businesses. And where we have housing available for people, it's pretty seamless for them to move from place to place. And kids in their early 20s, they love it.
That's great. And do you have housing available for folks?
We do, yes. So all of the employees at Zion are housed on site right there.
Great.
We don't have, that's not true for Snowbird. We have some, but not all. And at Copper, we have quite a bit as well.
So will you look to expand into additional national park properties? Is that the goal?
Yes. So the Park Service publishes a list of what's coming down the pike, and then we plan for it. Bryce Canyon's coming up. We're going to bid on that. Acadia is coming up. Grand Teton's coming up. Oh, wow. Shenandoah already came. We're waiting to hear back. And Olympic already came, and we're waiting to hear back. So great. That's the goal.
Great. Let's shift back to kind of your role and how you see yourself as a leader. How much responsibility do you take for the culture of POWDR versus, is it a collective? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's my job, right, to set the tone, hire the team, and make sure people have the tools. So I don't know who else's responsibility it would be. My focus is on making sure that it's well known what I expect, that the leaders that report directly to me of all the functional areas and the general managers of each property understand what that is. And then we work really hard with the HR teams and the tech teams to make sure that we have scalable ways to disseminate that to the farthest reaches of the organization, which I think is an area where a lot of large organizations run into trouble. Is that how do you reach somebody who doesn't have a company email or only wants to communicate with WhatsApp?
Yeah.
And so, but that's part of the culture. That effort itself is part of the culture.
Yeah.
And putting it out there and trying to get it done. And we're not
Valuing
perfect,
communication, working
Yeah.
to get it right,
Yeah.
versus assuming that someone sees everything that you're sharing.
But my job is to make sure that I'm living the culture that I say I want at the tone, and then to make sure that I'm fighting for the resources with the board to spend money on making sure we have all the tools to get it done.
That's great. That sounds like another panel, fighting for the resources. We're just about at time, so I have just one last question, and it's really a fill in the blank. I'd love for you to complete this sentence. I am hopeful because, or about.
Yeah. A lot of things give me hope. Every time I go out to one of our awesome places and I see people out there, and it's more people than were there 5 or 6 years ago, and it gives me hope that there's more people connecting with the planet, with each other, and that in general, I believe that that's a good thing for the universe. What also gives me more hope on a more down-to-earth level is new AI tools in the HR software system that can help us make sure that the 8,000 people that we have are in the right place at the right time and delivering. And that's a monumental undertaking, but with some of the new tools that are coming out today, there's like real hope around efficiency there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Let's give me a hand.